I'd spent weeks planning this Christmas dinner, dreaming of a night filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of family closeness I hadn't felt in years. My name is Anne Peterson, and at 62, I thought I'd learned enough about life to know that family is everything. Or at least, I wanted to believe it was. 8 months ago, I lost my husband, Stanley, to a heart attack. He was my rock, my partner of 35 years, a kind-hearted engineer who could fix anything except, it turns out, the growing distance between me and our 3 children. Stanley loved Christmas. Every year, he'd drag out the old decorations from the attic, humming carols off-key, while we set the table for our kids and grandkids. This would be my first Christmas without him, and the emptiness in our house felt heavier than I could bear. So, I decided to do something special. I booked a table for 8 at Valier's Bistro, a beautiful restaurant just outside Chicago. $700 for the reservation. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. If it meant bringing my family together, it was worth every penny. I spent the morning of Christmas Eve choosing my outfit with care. I pulled out the sapphire silk dress Stanley always said made my eyes sparkle. I fastened the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 35th anniversary, my fingers trembling slightly as I clipped them on. I told myself it was excitement, but deep down, I knew it was something else, a quiet fear that maybe my kids wouldn't show up. They hadn't been close to me in years, not really. Mary, my oldest, was 40 now, a bank manager with a polished smile and a busy schedule. George, 38, was always chasing the next big real estate deal. And Abigail, my youngest at 35, was a free-spirited artist who seemed to drift further away with every passing year. Still, I held on to hope. Christmas was a time for miracles, wasn't it? I pictured us at the restaurant, Mary with her daughter Charlotte, George with his quick wit, Abigail with her stories of painting in far-off places. I imagined toasting to Stanley's memory, sharing stories about him, maybe even laughing until we cried. I could almost hear the clink of glasses, the hum of holiday music in the background. That's what I was holding on to as I finished getting ready, my heart a little lighter with every step. Then the calls started coming. It was 3 o'clock, just as I was slipping on my coat. First it was Mary. Her voice was soft, almost too sweet, the way it always got when she wanted to smooth something over. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said. "Charlotte's come down with a high fever. I can't risk bringing her out tonight. You understand, don't you?" Charlotte was my 16-year-old granddaughter, Mary's daughter, a quiet girl with a talent for drawing that always made me smile. I hadn't seen her in months, and the thought of her being sick tugged at my heart. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice catching. "Do you need me to bring anything over? Soup, maybe?" No, we'll manage," Mary replied quickly. "Maybe next time." "Okay, rain check. Like a family dinner was something you could just reschedule, like a cancelled tennis game. 20 minutes later, George called. "Mom, I'm stuck at the office," he said, his voice clipped, impatient. "This deal's falling apart, and I have to stay late to fix it. You know how it is." I did know how it was. George's deals always came first, ever since he started his real estate business. I'd heard the same excuse for birthdays, anniversaries, even Stanley's funeral. "What about your wife and kids?" I asked, hoping at least they might come. "Oh, they're helping Mary with Charlotte," he said. "You know, keeping things calm while she's sick." Something cold settled in my chest. "They're all together." I thought, "just for a bit," George added quickly. "Nothing planned, just helping out." Nothing planned, right? The final call came from Abigail. Her excuse was the most creative. "Mom, my car broke down on the highway," she said, her voice dramatic, like she was reading a script. "I'm waiting for a tow truck, and there's no way I can make it tonight. I'm so sorry." I sat on the edge of my couch, still in my sapphire dress, staring at my phone. 3 children, 3 excuses, all within an hour. The coordination of it all was almost impressive, but it cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I thought about canceling the reservation, staying home, curling up with Stanley's old sweater, but I'd already paid for the table. The dress was on, the earrings were sparkling. Sitting alone in my quiet house felt worse than sitting alone in a restaurant full of strangers. So, I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and drove to Valier's Bistro. The restaurant was everything I'd hoped it would be: elegant, warm, with twinkling lights and the soft hum of holiday cheer. Families filled the tables, their laughter wrapping around me like a blanket I couldn't quite reach. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to my table for 8. "Will it just be you tonight?" she asked gently, and I saw the pity in her smile. "For now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll keep the table as it is." I sat down, alone in a sea of empty chairs, and ordered a glass of Stanley's favorite white wine. I told myself I could do this. I told myself I'd be fine. But as I sipped the wine, staring at the empty seats where my family should have been, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And I was about to find out just how wrong it was. The lights at Valier's Bistro twinkled like stars, but they couldn't warm the ache in my chest. I sat at that big, empty table for 8, the sapphire dress feeling heavier with every passing minute. The waitress, bless her, didn't say a word about the fact that I was alone. She just poured me another glass of Stanley's favorite white wine and set down a plate of stuffed mushrooms I'd ordered on a whim. I couldn't afford to be extravagant, not really, not on a retired teacher's pension. But I needed something to fill the space where my family should have been. The food, the wine, it was all I had to keep me company. I tried to focus on the holiday bustle around me. Families laughed, clinking glasses, sharing stories. At the table next to mine, a grandmother was at the center of it all, her eyes bright. As her grandkids passed her plates of turkey and mashed potatoes, she looked so loved, so needed. I wanted to feel that too, but the empty chairs around me felt like a silent accusation. Had I done something wrong? Had I pushed my kids away somehow? I took a sip of wine, trying to swallow the questions, but they burned in my throat. That's when the tears started, quiet at first, just a sting in my eyes, then spilling over, until I was dabbing at my face with the linen napkin, hoping no one would notice. Then I heard it, footsteps, quick and determined, cutting through the hum of the restaurant. I looked up and there was Charlotte, my 16-year-old granddaughter, weaving through the tables like she was running from something. Her red hair was a mess, her coat half-buttoned, her cheeks flushed from the cold, or maybe something else. "Grandma Anne," her voice carried across the room, and a few diners turned to look. The hostess tried to stop her, but Charlotte didn't slow down until she reached my table. She was breathing hard, clutching a thick manila envelope in her hands. "Charlotte?" I stood up, confused, my napkin falling to the floor. "What are you doing here? Aren't you sick?" "Your mom said." "I'm not sick, Grandma." Her voice cracked, and I saw tears in her eyes, though she was fighting to hold them back. "They lied to you. They're all together, at the Olive Grove, 3 blocks from here." My knees felt weak. I sank back into my chair. The Olive Grove. Together. The words didn't make sense. "What do you mean, honey?" "They said they couldn't come because they planned it, Grandma." Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "They didn't want you there tonight. They needed you out of the way." She glanced at the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling as she clutched it tighter. Because of this, I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding. It looked official, heavy with papers, sealed with a lawyer's stamp. "What is it, Charlotte?" My voice was barely audible, like I was afraid of the answer. She sat down in the chair next to mine, the one that should have been Mary's. "It's from Grandpa Stanley's lawyer. It came to Mom's house this afternoon." Her eyes met mine, and I saw something new in the manga, maybe, or determination. "It's his will, Grandma. And there's something else in here they don't want you to see." My hands shook as I reached for the envelope, but I didn't open it yet. "Slow down, sweetheart. Tell me what's going on. Why are they at the Olive Grove? What's in the will?" Charlotte took a deep breath, like she was steadying herself for something big. "They've been planning this for weeks. Mom, Uncle, George, Aunt Abigail, they knew about the will reading tonight. They didn't want you there because Grandpa left everything to you. The house in the suburbs, the savings, the land in Wisconsin. All of it. Nothing for them." The restaurant seemed to fade around me, the clatter of dishes and laughter turning to a dull hum. "Everything to me," I whispered. "But why would they lie about that? Why not just tell me?" Charlotte's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she looked so much older than 16. "Because they've been lying to you for years, Grandma, about a lot of things." She reached into the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper, its edges crisp and clinical. "This is a DNA test. Grandpa had it done before he died." I took the paper, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. The words blurred together scientific terms I didn't understand, but some parts were clear enough. It was a comparison of Charlotte's DNA to our family's. My heart stopped as I read the conclusion. "Charlotte," I said, my voice breaking, What does this mean? Her eyes filled with tears, but she held my gaze. I'm not your biological granddaughter, Grandma Anne. I'm not Mom's biological daughter. She adopted me when I was 2, from a teenage mom who couldn't keep me. She never told you the truth. She's been using me all these years to get money from you and Grandpa, pretending I was family. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. The wine glass slipped from my hand, tipping over, the pale liquid spreading across the tablecloth like a stain. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about Mary, about Charlotte, about the years of birthday cards and Christmas gifts and checks I'd written for school supplies and summer camps, it was all crumbling around me. Charlotte, I whispered. Why would she do that? Why would they all lie to me? Charlotte reached for my hand, her grip warm and steady. Money, Grandma. It's always been about money. Mom figured out early on that you and Grandpa would do anything for family, especially for a kid like me. So she made up a sob story about a distant cousin who died, leaving me behind. She used me to get you to open your checkbook, school fees, clothes, art classes, all of it. And Uncle George and Aunt Abigail were in on it, too. I looked at her, this girl who'd run through the cold to find me, who'd chosen to tell me the truth, even though it must have broken her heart. How did you find out? I asked. How did you get this envelope? Charlotte's voice softened, but there was a fire in her eyes. I overheard them at the Olive Grove. They thought I was in the restroom, but I was listening. They were talking about the will, about how they could fight it, how they could prove you weren't fit to handle the money. Mom was already on the phone with a lawyer, talking about guardianship laws. Uncle George was saying they could use my adoption to make you look confused, like you didn't know what was going on. Aunt Abigail just kept saying they deserved the money more than you did. My mouth went dry. Guardianship. They want to say I'm not fit. The idea was so absurd, so cruel, it felt like a bad dream. I'd spent my life teaching children, balancing budgets, keeping a home together, and now my own kids were plotting to take it all away. Charlotte nodded, her tears finally spilling over. I couldn't let them do this to you, Grandma. You've always been there for me. Every drawing I showed you, every time I felt like I didn't belong, you made me feel loved. I don't care what the DNA test says, you're my family. And I had to tell you the truth. I squeezed her hand, my heart breaking and mending all at once. The restaurant was still buzzing around us, but it felt like we were in our own little world, just the two of us, holding on to a truth that was both painful and freeing. I looked at the envelope on the table, still unopened, and knew that whatever was inside would change everything. But as I looked at Charlotte, this brave, honest girl who'd chosen me over the lies she'd been raised on, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not just pain, but a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something real. The wine stain on the tablecloth looked like a wound, spreading slowly as I sat there, staring at Charlotte across the table. Valier's bistro was still alive with holiday cheer, families laughing, glasses clinking, but it felt like the world had stopped moving. My granddaughter, this girl with the fiery red hair and the shy smile I'd loved since she was a toddler, wasn't my blood. And my children, Mary, George, Abigail, had been lying to me for years, using Charlotte as a pawn to siphon money from Stanley and me. The DNA test in my hands felt heavier than the envelope itself, its cold, clinical words tearing apart everything I thought I knew about my family. Charlotte, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, how long have you known? I needed to understand, to piece together how this had happened right under my nose. She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her water glass. I didn't know for sure until tonight, Grandma Anne, but I've wondered for a long time. Little things never added up. Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it, like she'd been carrying this weight for years, and was finally letting it go. My hair, for one. Everyone in the family is blonde or brunette, but I'm this bright red, and I'm taller than Mom, taller than anyone. Plus, I love drawing. Nobody else in the family does. I used to ask Mom about it when I was little, and she'd just say I got it from some distant cousin, but her stories kept changing. I nodded, my mind racing back to all the times I'd noticed those differences, too. Charlotte's red curls, her quiet intensity. The way she'd sit for hours sketching in my living room while Mary chatted about school fees or medical bills. I'd thought it was charming, a sign she was special. Now I realized it was a clue I'd been too trusting to see. What else, honey? I asked, leaning closer. What made you suspicious? Charlotte took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. Medical stuff, mostly. When I was 10, I had to get my tonsils out. The doctors kept asking about family history, heart disease, allergies, that kind of thing. Mom would get this panicked look, like she didn't know what to say. Sometimes, she'd claim my biological parents died too young to know their history. Other times, she'd say I got my asthma from your side of the family. But the stories never matched up. I started wondering if she was hiding something. I felt a pang in my chest, imagining a little girl trying to make sense of those inconsistencies. That must have been so confusing, I said, reaching for her hand again. Her fingers were cold, but she squeezed back, and that small gesture felt like a lifeline. It was, she admitted. But it wasn't just that. I overheard things. When I was 12, I'd catch Mom on the phone with Uncle George or Aunt Abigail, saying stuff like, as long as she doesn't find out, or it's working better than we planned. I didn't know what they meant at the time, but it stuck with me. And then tonight, at the Olive Grove, it all made sense. Tell me what happened there, I said, my voice steadier now, though my heart was still racing. I needed to hear it, every detail, no matter how much it hurt. Charlotte's eyes darkened, like she was reliving the moment. They thought I was in the restroom, but I was standing just outside the private room they'd booked. Mom was leading the conversation, all businesslike, talking about Grandpa's will. She said they'd known about it for months, that the lawyer had called them weeks ago to set up the reading. They planned the dinner at the Olive Grove to keep you away, Grandma. They didn't want you to know that Grandpa left everything to you, the house in the suburbs, the savings, the land in Wisconsin. They were furious. My throat tightened. Furious, why? Stanley and I worked hard for everything we had. We built that life together. Why would they think they're entitled to it? Charlotte's laugh was bitter, far too old for her 16 years. Because they've been counting on it, Grandma, for years. Mom's been talking about turning the house into a rental property. Uncle George wanted to use the savings for some big real estate deal. Aunt Abigail was already planning a trip to Europe with her share. They thought it was theirs, and when they found out it wasn't, they started talking about how to fight it. Fight it how? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. The wine stain on the table seemed to grow darker, like a shadow spreading over my heart. Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. They want to say you're not capable of handling the money. Mom was on the phone with a lawyer, talking about guardianship laws, about how they could prove you're too old, too forgetful, to manage your own affairs. Uncle George was saying they could use my adoption as evidence, say you were confused, that you didn't even know I wasn't really family. Aunt Abigail suggested hiring a doctor to back them up, someone who'd say you're not mentally fit. The words felt like a slap. My own children, the ones I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, were plotting to strip away my independence. I thought of all the times I'd written checks for the Mary's emergencies, for Charlotte's school supplies, George's business loans that never got repaid, Abigail's art supplies that somehow cost thousands. I'd thought I was helping my family, being a good mother, but they'd been playing me, all of them, for years. How much money, Charlotte? I asked, my voice shaking with anger now. How much did they take from us? She hesitated, like she didn't want to hurt me more. The investigator's report was in the envelope, it said. Over $150,000, just for me. School fees, clothes, summer camps, art classes. But that's not all. There were other things: Uncle George's business investments, Aunt Abigail's trips, Mom's renovations. The report had numbers, Grandma. Probably close to $300,000 over the years. $300,000. The number hit me like a wave, knocking the air out of my lungs. Stanley and I had saved carefully, lived modestly, thinking we were building a legacy for our family. And all along, they'd been bleeding us dry, using Charlotte as their excuse. I looked at her, this girl who'd grown up in the middle of their lives, and my heart broke for her. Charlotte, I said softly, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to carry this. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she shook her head. Don't be sorry, Grandma. You and Grandpa were the only ones who ever made me feel like I mattered. Every time I showed you one of my drawings, you'd hang it on the fridge, tell me I could be an artist someday. Every birthday, you'd send me a card with a little note, just for me. Mom used me to get money, but you loved me for real. Even if I'm not your real granddaughter, you're my real family. I felt tears sting my eyes again, but this time, they weren't just from pain, they were from something deeper, something warm and fierce. I reached across the table and pulled Charlotte into a hug. holding her tight as the restaurant noise faded around us. "You are my family, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Blood or no blood, you're mine. And I'm not letting anyone take that away from us." As I held her, I glanced at the unopened envelope still lying on the table. Whatever was inside Stanley's will, more secrets, more proof of my children's betrayal. I knew it would change everything. But sitting there with Charlotte, feeling her arms around me, I realized something else was starting to. Something honest, something real. For the first time that night, I wasn't alone. And that gave me the strength to face whatever came next. The envelope sat on the table between us, its edges worn but heavy with secrets. Valier's bistro was still buzzing with Christmas cheer, but for me, the world had narrowed to Charlotte's tear-streaked face and the truth she'd just laid bare. My children, Mary George, Abigail, hadn't just abandoned me tonight. They'd been betraying me for years, using Charlotte, my sweet, artistic granddaughter, as a tool to drain Stanley's and my savings. $300,000. The number echoed in my head, each digit a reminder of how blind I'd been. But as I looked at Charlotte, her red curls catching the soft light, her eyes fierce with loyalty, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. "Shala," I said, my voice steadier than it had been all night. "We need to know everything in that envelope. If Stanley left it for us, he had a reason." She nodded, her hands still trembling, but her jaw set, like she was ready to face whatever came next. I opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of papers, legal documents, a handwritten letter, and a small key taped to a note. The letter was in Stanley's careful handwriting, addressed to me, "For my dearest Anne, when you're ready to fight back." My heart skipped a beat. Even in death, Stanley was still looking out for me. "We should call his lawyer," I said, glancing at the clock. It was late, but this couldn't wait. "Margaret Klein. She's been handling Stanley's affairs for years. If anyone knows what this is about, it's her." Charlotte pulled out her phone, her fingers flying as she looked up Margaret's number. I took a sip of water, trying to steady myself. The wine stain on the tablecloth looked less like a wound now, and more like a battle scar. I wasn't the fragile old woman my children thought I was. Not anymore. Margaret answered on the second ring, her voice warm but professional, even at this hour. "Anne, I was hoping you'd call," she said. "I heard from my assistant about what happened tonight. Can you and Charlotte come to my office first thing tomorrow? There are things Stanley wanted you to see, but only if things went the way they did." I agreed, my mind racing. Stanley had planned for this. He'd known our children might turn against me. The thought made my chest ache, but it also gave me strength. He'd believed in me, even when I hadn't believed in myself. The next morning, Charlotte and I took a cab to Margaret's office, a small, unassuming building downtown. Charlotte clutched the envelope like it was a lifeline, her eyes darting to me every few minutes, like she was afraid I might change my mind about her. "You're not the enemy, sweetheart," I told her as we stepped out of the cab. "You're the only one who showed up." She gave me a small, grateful smile, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the little girl who used to draw me pictures of flowers and stars. Margaret greeted us warmly, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes kind but sharp behind her glasses. "Anne, Charlotte," she said, gesturing to two chairs across from her desk, "I'm so sorry you're going through this." But Stanley prepared for it. He was a smart man. She opened a file and pulled out another envelope, thicker than the one Charlotte had brought. "He hired a private investigator 2 years ago. After he started noticing things, requests for money, stories that didn't add up. He wanted to protect you, Annette." She handed me a folder filled with photographs, receipts, and bank statements. The first photo showed Mary leaving a high-end boutique, bags in hand. The timestamp just hours after she'd called me crying about Charlotte's emergency medical bills. Another showed George at a steakhouse, toasting with clients over a $600 bill, the same day he'd asked for a loan to save his business. Abigail's receipts were the most brazen, thousands spent on art retreats in Italy, paid for with the money I'd given her for studio supplies. Page after page showed deposits from Stanley and me, followed by transfers to luxury stores, travel agencies, even a down payment on a sports car for George. None of it had gone to the emergencies they'd claimed. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Margaret's face softened, like she hated to be the one to tell me. "Close to $350,000 over 14 years, she said. most of it under the pretense of helping Charlotte or covering family emergencies. I felt like I'd been punched. Stanley and I had lived simply, saving every penny for our kids, for Charlotte, for a future we thought we were building together, and they'd been spending it on vacations and designer clothes while I worried about making ends meet. Charlotte reached for my hand, her touch grounding me. "I didn't know, Grandma," she whispered. "I thought the art classes, the summer camps. I thought you wanted to help." "I did," I said, squeezing her hand, "and I'd do it again. For you, but not for them. Not anymore." Margaret slid another document across the desk. "This is the most important part," she said. "Stanley's will includes a protection clause. If anyone challenges it or tries to declare you incompetent, they forfeit their claim to the estate entirely. It all goes to you, Anne, and if anything happens to you, it goes to Charlotte and any other grandchildren, bypassing Mary, George, and Abigail completely." She pointed to a paragraph near the end. "He also set up a trust. If they try to question your mental capacity, all assets go under an independent trustee until the matter's resolved. Stanley made sure they can't touch a dime." I sat back, stunned. Stanley had always been 3 steps ahead, his engineer's mind planning for every possibility, but it was the letter that broke me open. I opened it with trembling hands, Charlotte watching silently beside me. "My dearest Anne," it began, "if you're reading this, it means our children have shown you who they really are. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from this pain while I was still here. But every decision I made, every document I prepared, was to protect you, not out of anger at them. Though I was angry, but out of love for you." Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. "You've always blamed yourself for their selfishness, their distance. You thought you failed as a mother, but you didn't, Anne. You gave them everything: love, support, every chance to be better. They chose to see your kindness as weakness, your generosity as something they could exploit. I watched it happen, year after year, and I stayed quiet too long because I couldn't bear to break your heart. But when they started talking about your forgetfulness, about managing your money, I knew I had to act." He went on, his words like a warm hand on my shoulder. "You are not responsible for their choices. You are not obligated to keep forgiving them. You are the strongest woman I know, Anne, and you deserve to live the rest of your life on your terms. Charlotte is a good girl. She's not our blood, but she's shown more heart than our own children ever have. I've left a fund for her education in a separate account, and the key to our Wisconsin land is in the safe at home. Build something beautiful there, Anne. Build something that's yours." I folded the letter, my hands no longer shaking. Stanley hadn't just left me money or a house. He'd left me the tools to take back my life. I looked at Charlotte, who was reading over my shoulder, her eyes wide with awe. "Grandpa really thought of everything," she said softly. "He did," I said, my voice strong now. "And now it's my turn to do something about it." I turned to Margaret. "What do we do next?" She smiled, a glint of approval in her eyes. "We start by protecting what's yours. Stanley's already laid the groundwork. Now it's up to you to decide how to use it." As we left her office, Charlotte by my side, I felt a fire I hadn't known in years. My children thought they could break me, but they didn't know their mother, not really, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of our suburban home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air smelled of fresh earth and clematis from the garden Charlotte and I had planted on the small plot of land Stanley left us. It wasn't just a garden, it was a promise, a piece of something new we were building together. I was 62, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. That Christmas night at Valier's Bistro had shattered me, but it also woke me up. Mary, George, and Abigail had shown me who they really were, and I'd made the hardest decision of my life, to let them go. The phone calls came, of course, just as Stanley had predicted in his letter. Mary called first, her voice thick with tears, begging for forgiveness. "Mom, we're family," she sobbed. "You can't just cut us off like this." I took a deep breath and said, "Family doesn't lie, Mary. Family doesn't plot to take away someone's freedom. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." George tried anger instead, his voice sharp over the phone. "You're letting Charlotte poison you against us, Mom. Can't you see she's manipulating you?" I almost laughed at the irony. No, George, I said calmly. Charlotte's the only one who's been honest with me. You're the ones who've been manipulating me for years. Abigail was the last, her voice soft and pleading, promising she'd change, that she'd make things right. But I'd heard those promises before, and I was done believing them. You don't get to hurt me again, I told her. Not anymore. It wasn't easy, saying those words. Cutting off my own children felt like carving out a piece of my heart, but Stanley's letter, tucked safely in my dresser drawer, reminded me of something vital. I wasn't responsible for fixing what they'd broken. I deserved peace, I deserved respect, and I deserved to be loved for who I was, not what I could give. Charlotte thrived in ways I'd never seen before. Without the weight of her mother's lies, she blossomed into the remarkable young woman she'd always been beneath the surface. She graduated high school that spring, her red curls bouncing as she crossed the stage, a shy smile on her face. She'd been accepted to an art school in Chicago with a partial scholarship, and Stanley's education fund would cover the rest. She spent her days sketching designs for the garden, turning the Wisconsin plot into a little oasis of flowers and herbs. It was her graduation gift to herself, but to me, it was a symbol of the life we were building together, life rooted in truth and love. Our new home wasn't just the house in the suburbs, it was the people who filled it. Henry, the baker from the shop down the street, who'd drop by with fresh scones and stories about his grandkids. Alice, the librarian who'd become my confidant, always ready with a book recommendation or a glass of wine. And Dr. Patel, who checked on my blood pressure but stayed for dinner, his dry humor reminding me of Stanley. They weren't my blood, but they were my family people who showed up because they cared, not because they wanted something. One evening, as Charlotte and I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching fireflies dance in the garden, my phone rang. It was Margaret Klein, Stanley's lawyer. "Anne," she said, her voice warm, "I wanted you to know we finalized the last of Stanley's instructions today. He set up a charitable fund, $150,000, to be donated in your name. It's going to the children's hospital and the women's shelter in town. The papers were signed this morning, since your children's attempts to challenge the will were dismissed." I sat there, stunned, the phone pressed to my ear. "In my name?" I asked, my voice catching. Even now, Stanley was making sure the world saw me as a woman of substance, someone who gave back, someone worthy of respect. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, tears prickling my eyes. "That means more than you know." As I hung up, Charlotte looked at me, her sketchpad resting on her lap. "Good news, Grandma?" she asked, her smile soft but bright. "The best," I said, and I meant it. I reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers in mine. "Charlotte, I know what the DNA test said. I know you're not my blood, but you're the realest family I've ever had." Her eyes welled up, but she smiled, squeezing my hand back. "You're my family, too, Grandma, always will be." We sat there in comfortable silence, the fireflies glowing, the garden alive with the promise of spring. Tomorrow, Charlotte would start packing for art school. I'd drive her to Chicago, in the fall, help her settle into her dorm, like any proud grandmother would. And when she came home for holidays, it would be to this house, to this garden, to this life we'd built together. I thought about my children, how they'd probably try again, more calls, more apologies, more promises they wouldn't keep. But I had Stanley's letter, his words like a shield. "You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm." I deserved peace, I deserved respect. And sitting here, surrounded by a garden we'd planted and people who loved me for me, I finally had both. There's a lesson I've learned through all this. One, I hope you'll carry with you. Family isn't just the people you're born to, it's the people who choose you, who show up when it matters, who love you without expecting anything in return. Sometimes, letting go of the ones who hurt you is the only way to make room for the ones who heal you. So, I ask you, what's your story? Have you ever had to let go of someone to find your own peace? Share it below. I'd love to hear it. And thank you for listening to mine.